dystopian fiction has been moved to current affairs.
Hello, and welcome to episode 27 of Dystopian Fiction Has Been Moved to Current Affairs. I'm joined with my co host Claire, and today we'll be looking at the 1976 cult classic film Logan's Run. Claire, would you like to sort of go ahead and give us a little summary of this
Oh, yes.
movie?
So a lot of our pre-recording chat has been about what is going on in this film, but we will do our best. The premise is that this is an enclosed futuristic city set in the year 2274, in which everyone has a sort of life of pleasure, but it ends with mandatory death at 30, and the promise of renewal, which seems to be some sort of idea about reincarnation or resurrection of some sort. If you don't agree to die at 30 and you try to make a run for it, then you are chased down by the police, who are known as Sandmen. And our protagonist, played by Michael York, is one of these Sandmen who is entrusted with a strange mission granted him by the computer that seems to run everything, that he is to go and find the missing runners, of whom there are more than 1,000, and seek out and destroy the mythical place of sanctuary that exists outside the city walls. To do this, he is swiftly counted down, loses 4 years of his life to his own last day, and himself becomes a runner, accompanied by Jenny Agutter wearing a very skimpy green outfit. And off they go into the outer post-apocalyptic America beyond their walls, only to find nothing much there, but to realize that they don't have to be bound by this life clock that is patched into their hands in the form of a changing color crystal.
Yeah,
So that, we think, is what this film is about.
it's what the story's about. Yeah.
Yeah.
It seems like I think me and Claire had a bit of a discussion that as the movie seems like more obsessed with its whole like aesthetic
Mm,
sort of this like
yeah.
I mean for us like now retrofuturism better than the 70s just like their
Yeah.
interpretation of what the future would look like and
Yeah.
obsessed with its like gadgets and different technology and yeah I guess like almost just like it is I really enjoyed watching like how it set the scene and the setting and how like I can imagine at the time well I don't know this is it I was going to say I can imagine at the time it was kind of like groundbreaking to see all these effects especially like the scene with the
Mm.
carousel which
Yeah.
is the sort of
Yeah.
ritual that people at 30 go through
That's
to
right.
sort of face
Yeah.
their deaths or
If you squinted, you couldn't see the strings.
yeah quite
So
genuinely
it was
impressive
pretty good. And some of the other stuff like the falling ice and things like that,
yeah
it's not like things have got much better in about the 90s. So I think
yeah
it was
yeah
pretty radical. I also thought that aesthetically, it wasn't a bad predictor, maybe not of, year 2274, but it's some of the other stuff, like the lines of the vehicles, for example, some of the buildings, which reminded me a lot of stuff like new buildings on university campuses and things like that,
yeah
big shopping centres, kind of look a lot like that.
yeah
Um,
yeah
and even some of the sort of disgusting synthetic clothes, in a way,
yeah
you know, felt like they were predicting the fashions of the 80s and 90s. So,
yeah,
uh,
for sure.
yeah.
I mean, I think you can say, yeah, I don't know. I'm not, I wouldn't say it's aged well.
It's there's something
Um,
about it that it's not just the aesthetic and things like that, or even the effects. It's just something about the way in which, like, the actors perform, even though you've got, as they really kind of
yeah,
like big names. I used to love Jenny Agutter because she played Bobby in The Railway Children as a child, and I was completely like obsessed with her. Uh,
what else was she in?
she still comes up quite a lot. She's had a career that has lasted into her old age, as it were.
Call the Midwife. Is it,
Oh,
that's what
Call the
it's called?
Midwife. She's
Call the
Yeah,
Midwife. Yeah, my housemate was just being like, I feel like I recognize this woman
yeah,
the whole entire movie. And then she was
mm,
like, oh, she's from Call the Midwife. So
yeah,
yeah,
mm,
she is
yeah.
quite prolific even to today.
Yeah,
In
but
the
there is something
70s.
about the scripting, I think, that is sort of, I don't know, it's almost overly kind of performative rather than just sort of
Yeah.
natural in the way that it, the speeches work and things like that. But visually fairly kind of iconic, and it is based on a novel which you can still get hold of, but not as readily as some of the others that we have talked about with reaction to kind of like some of these films. But what I have read about the book does suggest that it has quite a lot more complex kind of explanation, as you can imagine, whereas
Mhm.
the film leaves a lot for you to kind of figure out or not
Yes,
as
yeah.
it goes along, and makes quite a number of changes from the book as well. But I think essentially the implied underlying kind of premise seems to be that at some point, apocalyptic crisis has wiped out humanity in America at large. We see once they get out into the outside that, the famous sort of buildings of Washington D.C. and the Lincoln Memorial and things like that have all been overgrown and sort of just left to ruin. And yeah, the sort of like the wildlife seems to have grown back, but things like the wild animals and fish and stuff seem to have just died, presumably from
Yeah.
pollution.
Yeah.
So it's a pretty wrecked place.
Yeah, we were saying like when, especially sort of seeing how the outside and that like how nature's sort of like it has like nature's sort of reclaimed
Mm.
these like urban environments. It was very kind of like reminiscent of what you would see in like The Last of Us, which a
Yeah.
little call back to episode 1.
Yes.
Um yeah, all the way back. But
Mhm.
yeah, I don't know, maybe like even the sort of aesthetics of that might have been like influential on
Mm,
how you like how the sort of outside world
mm,
of The Last of Us
mm.
was developed. But yeah, it was
Yeah, there's something,
yeah.
isn't there, about this idea of not only the kind of the destruction of things that are symbolic of
Mm,
our society as it stands, of our democracies, of our cities, of our institutions, but also this idea that within what we're told, or it's what is implied to be a reasonably short space of time, so let's assume somewhere around 300 years, maybe, there is a complete forgetting, a loss of education, a loss of understanding of what the world was that this city was built up in. Some decision has been made to preserve the human race, but the humans that they preserve know nothing about where they come from or previous kind of ways of living. They simply have this idea that, this is how things are. They're their own traditions, their own mythology,
mm,
and sort of distant ideas both about how the city has been built. So, one of the sort of levels of this journey is from the kind of plush, swishy, automatic doors, big shopping center style space down into the underground workings, where it's all much more industrial, and so on, and then through that into this kind of devastated outside. So there's kind of three layers, but even the second layer is unfamiliar to
yeah,
them.
yeah.
Everything around them is kind of mechanized. So yeah, I mean, I thought before we get on to kind of like needing to die, be killed off, and what happens at the carousel. I mean, in terms of their way of life in this city, did you have any thoughts about what we were supposed to think of it? You know, all
Well,
these young people swanning around in their brightly colored
just
clothes and
like
so on.
I feel like the movie's trying to like kind of criticize like the sort of idea of hedonism,
Mm,
especially the way that the like premise of the movie is described and all these little like mini descriptors is like, oh, yeah, society of like purely based on pleasure. It doesn't seem to like people are necessarily working, and
mm,
I feel like this society is yeah sort of based around that, and we sort of see that especially in the like film throughout kind of touches on like especially like its version of sexual liberation.
mm.
And I guess we just also see them at the gym quite a lot. Just yeah, just pretty
Yeah,
chill. Everyone seems pretty chill.
yeah.
But I guess I don't know because yeah, me and Claire were, again discussing the notes in advance, and it feels like it's trying to criticize a lot about it was released in 1976, but it feels like it's criticizing the sort of like youth of the 60s and like that
Mm.
counterculture movement and everyone kind of being a bit of a hippie and like chilling and in this society it feels like everything that like everything else seems automated. So
Yeah.
people don't have to go to work, and you don't have to live that sort
Mm,
of like the American dream of
mm,
like having a nuclear family,
mm,
stay at home wife, and like the husband goes to work. There's none of that. It's just kind of like no one knows their
mm.
parents. Like children are born artificially, and yeah,
Yeah.
no one like goes to work. What would have been interesting as well to see like where their actual like living and sleeping quarters look like.
Yes, because we only see
Just like
Logan's, and
their,
his is
yeah, day to
obviously
day.
somewhat different because he is a Sandman.
Yes,
Um,
exactly.
yeah, I thought that the it was interesting insofar as it seems to be a society where work is done by machines, droids,
Yeah.
something like that.
But at the same
Although
time, you don't really see any
you don't see
machines running
much of
around at
it.
all,
No, the only
except
ones
from like
are the
box, which
body.
you'll get
Oh yeah,
onto.
boxer we're talking about, but the body cleanup
Oh yeah,
machines
I took. But was that a machine in itself?
or a
Because it looked
person
like there
on
was
them.
kind
I
of a
wasn't sure.
yeah, most bizarre, just most
It's really
bizarre
gross.
visual I've
But
ever
yeah,
seen in my life.
yeah,
Just
yeah.
yeah, there's like a clip for the listeners who haven't seen the film where one of the people who's tried to escape their death at 30 gets shot down by one of the Sandmen who hunt them down, and they're like, all right, time for cleanup, and this
Mm.
just kind of like hovering. I don't know. It's
It's
just
yeah, it's unclear whether
machine.
it's supposed to be a
Yeah,
person kind of like on a hovercrafty thing or
yeah,
whether it's like a droid thing that hovers with a
and looks a bit
a
sort of
humanoid kind of
yeah
shape.
humanoid shape.
Because the focus is definitely on the kind of like massive acid spray or whatever that it dissolves the body with. Really grotesque, very, looks briefly like some sort of enormous pile of mints gently sort of soaking into
Yeah.
the ground. But I think it does reflect something about this kind of very sort of functional way of looking at things that need to be done. Because the only kind of two jobs that we really see are being a sandman and being what we might call a sort of plastic surgeon, but the person who operates the machine that can give you a new face or skin grafts
Oh
or whatever it
yeah,
is that
the
you
plastic
you need.
surgery aspect of the society as well is like
Mm,
you can just go, yeah, just like you can get your whole body altered or your
mm.
face altered, and like that's an interesting. I don't know,
Yeah.
where do you think that, what do you think that's sort of trying to comment about the
Mm,
society that like of Logan's Run, like how that sort of like extreme body modification is
mm,
like kind of just like a part of normal life, and people can just like wake up one day and be like, I'm gonna get a
yeah.
new face. I don't know, what do you think that's trying to say,
I
trying
th
to really comment?
Yeah, I don't know enough about the sort of history of plastic surgery other than that I know that it was being used at the beginning of the 20th century on war victims and soldiers
Yes.
and so on. But at what point it became something that people did to avoid the aging process. I'm not
Yeah, but
clear, but
except yeah,
here
yeah.
it's
There is no aging,
well,
so
there isn't, but although when Logan meets the rogue plastic surgeon, the one who gave a new face to a runner, he says, I thought you would be older, and the man's like, it's all my own work, So it's difficult, isn't it? Because especially in a film like this, how much difference is there between the person playing the 30-year-old and the person playing the 30-year-old who looks like they're 25? But
yeah, yeah.
there's clearly something here about kind of like an obsession with appearance, this idea that your bodily self is something that, one might just change at will, just because you think, you can make yourself look nicer, or as they say, just because you're bored. But I think it might also be, well, a couple of things that sprang to mind. One is that it makes some sort of point about kind of art and creativity insofar as there doesn't seem to be any high art or anything like that in this community, right down to the fact that the soundtrack is this not just synthesized but really kind of like unmusical synthesized sort of
Mm,
soundtrack while they're within the city. So all of this may has this thing about, well, as you say, people are kind of like pursuing pleasure, but they don't seem to be pursuing the things that we would all perhaps like society to do if they didn't have to work. Create great art and literature and so on.
yeah, yeah.
And yet they do have this idea, of kind of like the transformation of the body to be ever more attractive, as though that's become the kind of obsession, and that becomes something about the individual, and this idea that this is all about the individual as a person, as opposed to a wider society. Although we can come back to that because they obviously have to buy into the ideas of society to some extent. And then the other thing I think is that although you're right, you said there's like no old age, so why would they need to look younger? I think that there is an absolute obsession with growing older because you are getting closer to that 30, that point of death. And so everything about age becomes something about weakness or frailty, something that, it pushes you ever closer to your imminent demise, only you're much younger when you do it. So actually making yourself look 25 instead of 29 suddenly becomes something that actually is appealing because the parameters have just shifted. And they don't really have a concept of what old age looks like, as we see when they see, Lincoln's face and so on, and the old man's face.
Like the cracks on your
Yeah,
face.
yeah,
Can I touch? And that was also really bizarre just watching these like two people escape their weird futuristic
yeah,
city and then just be like, I'm gonna touch this old man's face.
yeah,
It was
yeah.
yeah, it was fascinating. Yeah. It's
So
like it's one thing that like I was discussing was how you must like in this like within this society you must be losing out on so many inventions and forward thinkers and like people who are like pioneers of
yes,
society
yeah,
like if you think about it for us like no one here's winning a prize like Nobel
mm.
Prize at like 25. Most
Mm.
people come up with their best work
Marsha, you have
within their
time
like
yet?
40s and 50s. Exactly time yet for me. But
Yeah.
it's like they must be me. I think in other than the sort of kind of gaps that I feel like we're missing in terms of understanding the transition of
Mm,
how our current society became what it looks like in Logan's Run in the
mm,
23rd century is also like how I wonder like how stagnant
mm.
their way of life has been for
Yeah.
the last like how many other generations because there's no one how many people are really kind of like questioning. I don't know, and
Mm,
also whether there is a sort of counterculture within their youth.
mm,
Like I mean, it's always sort of said, like every single younger generation is like it kind of rebels against the
mm,
older generation, but in a
mm.
society where everyone is 30 and under, I don't know, where does that
Yeah.
is where
I
does
think
that?
you raised some fascinating points there. I mean, one of the things that I would then say that this is partly about is this idea that not only have they constructed, and by they, I mean some ancestors to these people who've created this city, presumably, as I say, in the hope of, in a sort of resource deprived world, trying to keep the human race going in some way or other, and making the decision that, well, if we want to, I suppose, fairly distribute limited resources and limited space in the city and so on, we have to have a one in, one out policy. And the easiest way to
Mm,
do that is to set a sort of marker on death. But as you say, by putting it at 30, you don't get any of the advantages of a longer life and the development of a person. Because even with things like Brave New World, for example, as a similar premise, they get much longer. And in the original book of Logan's Run, I read that it was 21. So, you know,
yeah, no, yeah. In the movie,
no,
I also
mm,
heard they like
mm,
raised the age. Yeah,
mm.
21.
I know. So,
21.
but I suppose if we were talking about a way of keeping control over a society, almost
Ah,
like
that's
by
true.
putting it younger and by filling it with pleasure
Hmm.
and wanting to get as much pleasure as possible, and by not putting any responsibilities on people, and by kind of discouraging the idea of relationship, including obviously like parenting and so on, it makes it much easier to control a group of people generally into accepting
Yes.
the system,
Yeah, yeah.
which may have been meant like altruistically, like this is, we've got to get you to accept this because if the
Hmm.
human race is going to kind of like keep ticking over on its
Continue,
limited
yeah.
resources controlled by a computer, then we need people not to think. And I wonder how the raising of children plays into that as well, because that's talked about quite a bit. I mean, Logan is unusual because he goes and sees his offspring, the next Logan.
Logan
Um,
6.
yeah, but nobody's generally very interested in. There's almost a kind of like squeamishness about the idea of parents raising children.
Yeah, I mean, I also want to know again, plot holes, plot holes.
Mm,
What, how is the whole artificial birth process happening, especially in this society where everyone does seem to be just having sort of like pleasurable sex? Like,
mm.
what, how does the birth control work? Why aren't people getting pregnant anyway? Like, I don't know, it's
It is,
all a big mystery,
yeah.
big mystery.
It is weird, isn't it? Because the implication seemed to be that Logan had had sex with these various women who could be the
Potential mother of
seed mother, I think they
Logan.
call it. Yeah. So
Oh,
it's not
seed
like they're
mother.
harvesting from everybody and then just like shoving them together, in a test tube. It does seem to be something about, I don't know, impregnating somebody and then removing the embryo or something.
Yeah.
I don't know. It seems very, very, yeah,
Also,
unclear.
surely, so my understanding of the naming system within their society is, your offspring gets your name plus an extra
Mm,
number, but
mm.
there are everyone, the implications also that they don't know their parents. If I was Logan 6, would I not
Mm.
just go and track down Logan 5 and be like, "You're my
I guess
father"?
that by the time Logan 6 is old
Oh
enough, Logan
yeah,
5 will be dead.
he's gone. No, that's so
Yeah, this is
true.
such a small window, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I guess they plan on that again with the one in one out kind of idea. But yeah, as you say, things that are not explained. But I suppose what we're supposed to be left with is less the kind of like, but how could you do this, and more the kind of like, what are the implications of doing this? It made me think, and we'll talk more about Plato, I'm sure later. But it did make me think about in the Republic, one of Plato's radical ideas is this idea of basically communal child rearing. Um,
Hmm.
which was not uniquely his idea in the ancient world because they did it in places like Sparta, but his sort of idea that no child would know and be brought up by their parents, they would all be brought up by the society, and this seems to be a step beyond that. But Jenny Agut's character basically sort of says, well, when you've got these wild violent children, the cubs, is it because they didn't have a parental figure? And it's not really clear like even like how anyone's being educated or anything. We see a
Yeah.
bunch of kids in yellow who are presumably the sort of non-wild under 16s, I think it is.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but beyond that, other than the fact that these feral children exist and are shut away rather than anyone doing
Hmm.
anything to help them, that's all. It's all rather peculiar, really. But it does again raise questions, I suppose, if we're saying about that this is trying to give a sort of subtle indicator that the nuclear family is a better way to raise children or whatever, then perhaps that's one of the things that hints at. But maybe it's also saying something about, well, a society in which people are basically kind of mass produced as children, so they're not taught to think, they're just taught to accept things as they are because it's for the best. That's how you don't get rebellion. And the only counterculture seems to be like, I guess the Cubs are a kind of counterculture, aren't they? These sort of kids who've broken away from the system and gone to live wild in the cathedral bit. Not clear how they get, food and all that sort of thing. Or indeed how anyone gets food.
Yeah,
Another
no,
question.
what do they even eat? It seems like there's, a
Yeah.
passing moment where they talk about, oh, in the past,
Mm,
people would fish and
mm,
farm and
yeah.
and it's implied that they don't eat meat anymore.
Yeah, or if
So,
they do, it's synthesized or whatever. Yeah.
yeah.
I had a horrible vision that they might be, processing all of those dead people into
Oh,
protein.
wait, is that what the protein was? Is this where Box
Well, you see, that's
upon
sort of
their
the unclear
escape?
thing, because until I realized that all of those people were just like, frozen and like kept in the freezer, I thought that, yeah, that might be something about basically replacing the sort of previous protein with this new
Yeah.
protein. But that doesn't seem to be said. But yeah, there's certainly some sort of, again, presumably synthesizing and recreating of food going on within this limited resource because they're not getting food in from the outside. One of the things that this all made me think of was a really interesting article that I'll put a link to in the notes, but that basically it's from the Liverpool Law Review, and it uses Logan's Run as a way of kind of looking at rationing of resources in times of crisis and the human rights issues around that. So, like, for example, saying that in the pandemic, when decisions are having to be made about limited hospital resources, it's true all the time, but true particularly in a pandemic, who you treat and who you don't treat, or who you prioritize in terms of triage and that sort of thing. Basically saying that actually we're always making these decisions about saying, we can't keep everybody alive. So how are we going to decide who we keep alive? And obviously, the elderly and the disabled often get hit the hardest in terms of, how valuable their life is perceived to be. So in a way, this is like building a whole society on basically saying, well, let's prioritize the most fertile group in society and let's kill them off when they're likely to have parented, had a child through our unknown system, which almost, like, you can imagine if somebody was basically doing a mathematical kind of way of looking at, well, let's have a look at saving the world. Well, actually, we probably would be better off by just keeping humanity going in its younger form, less likely to get sick, less likely to need care or support or anything like that. So we'll just kill them off, and then we'll have a breeding pool when the time comes to emerge from the city or whatever. If
it's
that's the
very kind of
final
like
plan.
utilitarian.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there is obviously this point that everybody seems to be not only able-bodied but very able-bodied, as you said, springing around in their gymnasium and so on.
Oh my God, yeah.
They're all white.
Yes.
Pretty
Oh my
much.
God. Yeah,
Very white.
that is all true.
So you can
Actually,
always sort of say that genetically
the box is actually voiced by an African American actor, which I think I read somewhere was like a precursor for Darth Vader. So
Oh,
I don't know
right,
if they
okay.
made it at the
I
same
mean,
time, but
I'm not
like,
sure how
yeah,
great it is to say our only
I,
person of color that we can
it's
remember
because
is the
literally a
sort of,
robot.
yeah, kind of cyborg maniac. One of the things that this whole system does rely on is this idea of this mythology. And I thought that it depicted quite a lot of that in a almost like religious fundamentalist kind of way, right down to the kind of like charismatic carousel thing where people are sort of like raising their hands and calling up for renewal. The idea that you shouldn't ask for proof or question the mythology. This idea, yeah, of like ritualizing death, although not in the way that we think of with headstones and so on, rather by, I mean, what, like, are they kind of
Almost
like
like alien
electrocuting or
abduction,
something?
sort of,
Yeah,
yeah, and
they
then
sort of like
they
take it, get
reach
sucked
a
up, and
height.
then get
Yeah.
fizzed. Yeah.
I don't know. So yeah, and then well, so I guess they get fizzed. But yeah, so was it implied that the sort of ice matrix above the city, is that where those people who pass away go?
So no, I don't think so. So I think when they get out into the box in his ice palace, all of those people were
The
the
runners.
runners, the 1,000 and whatever runners.
Okay, right.
But yeah, I think that the people who get taken up in the carousel are, well, killed and cremated or killed and recycled, I would have thought. In the, they kind of disappear, which creates this myth of
Of
renewal in a way that
renewal,
you
yeah.
don't have if you've got bodies. And also, as I said, like with this kind of like lack of relationship, one of the things that's striking about Jessica as a character is that she feels the loss of her friend. That's how she
Yes.
and Logan meet. Yeah, she goes on the circuit, isn't it,
The
called, where you
circuit,
get
yeah,
beamed into a potential sexual partner's house.
yeah. Yeah. Crazy, crazy.
So yeah, she was sort of going for the sort of distracting one night stand thing, but then decided it wasn't what she wanted. But there is no memorialization, just like there is no history. And I thought that was really profound, like as something that, for human beings, we find meaning, like in our own past and our shared past and our the memories we share with others. But there's just like none of that.
None of that, yeah.
So yeah, there's I mean, visually kind of amazing thing, the whole kind of carousel and so on. And in stark contrast with the really quite unpleasant kind of hunt scene of the
Oh yeah.
runner. Especially because the Sandmen, in this case Logan, hero in inverted commas, and Francis, our villain in inverted commas, these two friends who end up, going in these different directions and one hunting the other, they take this huge pleasure in
In
chasing
hunting down
down,
these
and
people, yeah.
I mean, Logan's a terrible shot. So like, the runner guy just gets like nearly shot and nearly shot and nearly shot and jumping all over the place, and then eventually falls falls off a high balcony. But yeah, I just wondered, what do you think of the Sandmen and the sort of like presentation of them?
Well, they all are seemingly male.
Yes, yeah,
It's
in this
yeah, sort of
otherwise,
like this policing force is like a
yeah.
male force. And yeah, they're very much like they have their own uniforms. They're not in that same kind of like weird sort of synthetic
They get more
materialed
than one layer of
neon.
fabric, I
Yeah,
reckon.
that's crazy. And they actually get real shoes. I feel like
That
Jessica's
is
running
true.
around in
Her
socks
shoes
the
were
whole time.
so inappropriate, and after she got frozen, she did at least not try and put her tights back on again,
I
because
know, I was
that was.
like,
But yeah, although Logan's does get, of course, beautifully surgically sliced up
yeah, it
into
does
sort of.
get perfectly
Yeah,
sliced in all the
yeah,
appropriate
yeah.
places. But yeah, no, I mean, I think it kind of goes back to them not really questioning the status quo and it almost being like a bit of a sport. I
Mm,
guess, yeah, I guess, and then really the only characters that have a job, and that's how they describe it, is like, I
mm,
think Logan gets questioned for why, you know, these people who these other sort of inhabitants that believe in the sanctuary,
mm,
question him of like, he's gone around and shot all these other
mm,
runners, so why is he now running? And he was like,
yeah,
well, it was my job to do that.
mm,
It was my
yeah,
duty. It feels
yeah.
like they're the only real people that have kind of duty. But also, I guess there's a bit of another question is like, how come the hunting down of runners has to be performed by other people? Why is this
Yeah,
not,
I thought
a
that
job
as
that's
well.
automated as
Yeah.
well? Um,
I think that has a real sort of psychological element to it, as well as kind of like being
mm,
necessary for the narrative. But this idea that, all the kind of like good things and so on are done for you by the automated systems, but it is your fellow human being who polices whether you, I suppose, fulfill your duty within the system, i.e.,
mhm.
die at the end of it.
I guess yeah, it's interesting. I feel like it kind of plays into this narrative that like in order to have a utopia,
Mhm.
like people must sort of give a
Mhm.
sacrifice or like sacrifice something to
Yeah.
like about themselves, which I guess in this case is their lives at 30
Mm.
years old.
Yeah. And with the sort of depiction of the Sandmen and everything they say about their job, I was thinking about the language that Logan uses, where he's talking about. He says, I've never killed anybody. I have terminated them. There is
Oh,
a different. He's that language starts to shift, I think, as the film goes on. But this idea definitely around something that is clinical and necessary and is not moralized in any way. And that most people obviously feel the same thing about this. They're not trying to protect runners by and large, apart from the small network around Jessica, the people with the ankh and so on, who seem to be up for fairly violent rebellion because they seem to be lurking around ready to kill Logan for asking
mm,
questions. But by and large, you can see by the very fact that they're not willing to kind of reveal themselves, or concede that Logan really could be a runner, that there's a real fear not only about actually running, but giving any kind of impression that you might be interested in an alternative world, almost like a thought police. Like,
mm,
I think Logan says to Jessica, should you be saying these things to someone like me? Are you telling me you're going to run? And Francis telling him, as a Sandman particularly, he shouldn't be asking these questions.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
so again, something very fundamentalist there. Also notice that it's only the Sandmen who get guns. Nice
yes,
futuristic wah, wah, wah kind of guns, but
yeah,
even
sort of
so,
sparky, yeah.
yeah. So there's a very uncomfortable dynamic of power
Hmm.
going on there, I think. So we've mentioned box, we've mentioned some of the sort of
Hmm.
systems. Overall, what do we think about this idea of kind of like the role of machines. We've talked about like the fact that they seem to be running things, but we have like the mission
But
given to
yeah,
Logan.
so I guess yeah, the sort of overarching computer
Mhm.
has, has assigned Logan to almost go undercover and track down,
Mm,
these runners. And he also is somehow magically aged up. Um, I feel like part of his motivation is, he's cheated of his, I think he has
mm,
said extra 4 years or
mm.
something like that.
Again, reminding,
Um,
I suppose, that it's all arbitrary.
it's all arbitrary,
Yeah.
yeah. Like there is no real like you're not owed, no
Mm,
one's owed their 30 years. And
mm,
yeah, it's interesting that the technology can age people up. That was it.
mm.
I think some of the inconsistencies I found with this movie was just they'd kind of just throw in whatever they wanted into like in terms of like the different types of, gadgets and technologies that they could have in this universe,
Yeah.
and there was just no
No, it's
like
not it's
yeah
not a sort of cyber science kind of things where
yeah
you get a real sense of how all of this
how it
works. It's
works, yeah, like the
lots of
parameters of
lots of blinky
the
lights in
science,
different
yeah,
colors
blinky lights.
and screens talking to you and weird crystals embedded in your hand, which in itself, I suppose, is only one like step away from kind of like a wearable or something like that that tells
Yeah.
you, like how close to death you are because of your calorie
Yeah,
consumption and
yeah,
lack of
a
exercise and
lack of
high blood
exercise, yeah.
pressure. But yeah, I mean, obviously, Logan gets given this mission, presumably because he's the one who brings in the ankh that he's picked up off the dead runner, not because he's in any other way kind of like special. He's not the sort
Special,
of
yeah.
Neo or anything here. He just seems to be
By
the person,
chance,
yeah.
yeah, stumbles in.
But as a consequence, obviously, the computer reveals the fact that there is no renewal, that this idea around sanctuary is something that the computer perceives as a real threat. And presumably, its algorithms require it to respond to threats in certain ways. It's sort of slightly unclear that this thing that is really not a threat, you would think, if nobody ever gets out. But presumably the AI doesn't know that. But Box does.
Hmm.
So Box says that he is half man, half computer, and like better than both or something.
Yeah, I don't
Um,
know, it's sort of a
it is a
cyborg.
classic bit of costuming, you've got to admit.
Yes, yeah. Again, very, very 70s. I think it was the most jarring when Box would speak and you could sort of see the
Yeah, a bit of his
human
mouth
actor
inside. Yeah,
inside.
yeah,
I
yeah.
was like, whoa, this
Uh,
is
it was, it
very
was.
jarring.
I've definitely had people wear fancy dress costumes to parties that were really probably as good, if not better, than the costuming of poor old Box. Um, I think the thing I liked about the depiction of Box was that on the one hand, he seemed to be more than a machine insofar as he was creative. He'd created all this beautiful like ice art and things like that.
Yes, yeah, it's so true.
But then he
Like
was also like confined by his programming, like he'd been originally programmed to.
to freeze people, I guess.
Yeah, well, I think that he
Is
was,
that
I
what he
think he
does?
said originally, I think that he was part of the harvesting process. So that like when he was part of the provision of, what does he say?
Something about protein.
Protein and fish and fruit from the sea, something like that. So basically like sea-based proteins, fish and so on.
Hmm.
Presumably he had been part of a system for bringing those in, and he said they stopped coming, so he started dealing with whatever did come. So if you imagine, I guess, that he was in some way responsible for harvesting and freezing and providing the fish for
Hmm.
the city, and then he was like, okay, no more fish. Look, I've
No
got
more
these
fish, yeah.
great
All
big
these
human
people
protein
coming
blocks.
along,
I'll
yeah.
freeze them instead. Possibly. I don't know. I mean, and if he is part human, as he claims, then presumably he does need to eat himself. So maybe he is living off this protein.
How old does that make Box as well? Where does he fall within this kind of
I
like,
don't know. I
you
mean,
know,
cyborgs
last day age?
tend
Yeah.
to tend to tend to last, I think, because crucial organs can be replaced by computers.
Yeah, it's also
Um,
interesting that he like, the different computers are like also have a sense of like individual entity, like they're not part of a hive
yeah,
mind or anything.
no,
Like
no.
Box has made this decision
Mm,
on its own, on
mm.
their own, I guess. It's a this box, does it have a gender? We don't know. But
I don't
yeah, no, I like to just sort of go on and do
know.
his own thing. And also, yeah,
Mm,
it is interesting that like out of all the different characters that we meet, he's the only one that has like creativity, and
mm,
it goes back to
yeah.
like all the different things that do become automated.
Mm,
Like, you know, there is no creativity then like that is pursued by the human population. Instead,
mm,
it's I don't know, yeah,
yeah.
maybe it's all a big prediction and commentary on AI and
Oh.
automation, and
It
in fact, we lose our creative control.
Yeah,
And
I mean, it did make me think about the fact I listened to bits of discussion this week looking at the challenges of policing online media, and particularly the issues
Mhm.
with X and whether you can prosecute not just users but who creates information, but the dissemination of it and things like that. Basically, can we prosecute Musk? I think is the heart of
Yeah.
this, and the challenges of that. And one of the arguments that they, keep coming back to in terms of this, the bigger picture on this, is this idea that we still seem to have this mindset where it's like we can't do this because the technology doesn't allow us to, rather than saying, no, hold on, we are the people, we're
Mhm.
going to do this, and we're going to make the technology work for us rather than
For
the other way
us, yeah.
around. And it really struck me that this felt like this idea that, well, we've got this out of control kind of computer. We just need to kind of like live with that in whatever way, not controlling it at all. One of the other things I wasn't sure about is like how well this the importance of myth seems to be like really significant, but sanctuary is such a like powerful myth that even
Mm.
Fox seems to be aware of it, and
Aware of
certainly
what it
the
is, yeah.
supercomputer is aware of it. And whether, if that sort of kind of like counter myth exists, does it by its very nature suggest that actually many more people are unhappy with the status quo and they're just too scared to say it? Because you've got to have something like it's got to have grown quite big for there to
Yeah,
be
well, there's that little
awareness of it
secret
as a threat.
society
Mm.
of people who help runners escape, and they have
Yeah.
this sort of policy of like whoever asks, and like whoever asks, you know, must be given help. But also the people that meet Jessica and Logan sort of on the other side of this little secret door,
Mm-hmm.
before all the other sort of Sandmen come along. Who are they,
Yeah.
and where, like, you know,
Yeah,
where's
they seem to be kind of like
sort of guardians
ing
to
of the same
Sanctuary, but
sort
they're
of
not
thing.
in Sanctuary.
Yeah,
I don't
whether
know.
they've just not left yet because they haven't reached last day, but why would you, I don't know, why would you
Why
hang
would you stick
around?
around? Yeah,
Yeah.
clearly.
Although I
Yeah,
suppose there seems to be quite a kind of culture of staying till the end as well, because, Logan
yeah.
sort of saying to Jessica, you've got loads more time, you're only a green and so on.
Mhm.
Which raises a whole other question, which is this idea where your life clock governs your life so much that you have to dress in the color of
Dress in the color
like
of, yeah.
how old you
So
are.
true.
It's depressing. Obviously, we discover that Sanctuary doesn't seem, in fact, to be a place, but I wondered whether, and no one else has ever got out, but so why? I don't know that Logan particularly beats
Yeah.
Box in a way that nobody else ever could, but maybe Box snuck up better on the others
Yeah,
with his ice
maybe.
guns. I don't know. And also, I suppose that Logan has a gun and nobody else would have done
No
because
one else would
Sandman
have,
has
yeah.
never
The
done before.
Sandman's never become
Yeah,
a runner, yeah. That's
yeah.
true.
But if Sanctuary is something, like if they find something, it's not a place, but it's a mythology and so on. And it's an advanced enough mythology that somebody set up like a key with an ankh thing for getting
Yeah.
into the back roads. But I guess that's just a kind of like, well, how do you get out of the city thing? So is it like a state of mind? Are we supposed to think eventually that,
Sanctuary. Well, I
that
guess it's more of
actually
conceptual, like sanctuary is maybe just freedom, and
mm,
freedom is like just getting to the
mm,
outside, escaping the city. That is
yeah,
what sanctuary is like, is, you know, when they reach the outside, their little sort of gems in
mm,
their hands no longer are flashing or counting
yeah,
down
yeah.
or whatever. And
The
that
life
is,
clock
maybe
doesn't
that
function.
is, yeah, the life clock doesn't function. You know,
Yeah.
maybe that is their sanctuary, is the sort
Yeah.
of like release from that like kind of ongoing counting down of their
Mm.
lives, maybe. I don't know,
And I guess there's an
rather than it
irony
being a
then in
real
the kind of
place.
use of language because, like, sanctuary would imply a place of refuge, i.e., the city,
Hmm. Yes.
but actually it's sort of saying, no,
Like sanctuary is the
sanctuary
escape
is
from the
escape
city.
from the city, even though actually, chances are you wouldn't live very easily. I mean, I think they get off quite lightly tramping through jungle.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like they had water for very long either. They were just
Yeah, I
like,
know. I mean, there was some water at the beginning, which they didn't seem to think very much about. And then they were like, oh,
yeah,
they need to find some. And then Jessica gets all riled up by a lizard, doesn't she? Presumably because they've
yeah.
never seen animals. This is one of the worst things about the city. Distinct lack of animals. They have never seen a
Distinct
cat.
lack, yeah. Never seen a cat. Yeah, they should have
It's
brought a
tragic.
cat with them, the old man.
I know,
Yeah.
I know. And the other thing that I don't buy is that, cat would have got into the city. Of this, I have no doubt.
Yeah,
This is what cats do.
that's what cats do exactly. So true. Would have got past box,
Yeah,
made their way in.
yeah.
Exactly.
So should we go through kind of like what happens? They tramp around with Jessica in her inappropriate shoes and general lack of clothing, and
Yes.
swinging between falling madly in love with Logan for reasons that are entirely unclear,
No idea.
and moaning about the fact that she doesn't like the outside. And then they meet the old man,
The old
probably the
man.
best character.
Unnamed. Yeah. Probably, honestly, he stole the show every time he
Mm.
was on screen. I
Yeah,
was like, please give me more of him. And it's just funny that like who they meet as their like representative of the older generation is like a crazy cat
yeah,
man.
I
And I
know
feel like,
exactly.
you know what? So
Take
true.
that, JD Vance.
Yeah, exactly. Take that. But
Um,
yeah, no, he's brilliant. And this is, a bit of a mystery as well. Not really explained who he is, how he got there, but we
mm.
find out he had parents, and we find out about the old world ritual of death, of burial.
Yeah, and the
Um,
importance of that in his mind. He's played by Peter Ustinov, and it is a stellar performance. But
mm,
it it's also like I can't quite grasp what I think is going on with the fact that he quotes all of that T.S. Eliot for like all the bits about the cats and so on. I guess like it's almost a sort of profound mythology from the past rather than, in my opinion, Eliot's worst set of poems.
yeah.
Um, but obviously, he's this question about is he alone? Well, no, he's got all his cats. He doesn't know how old he is. He doesn't know what his name is. He doesn't quite remember what color his hair was until he finds like a picture. But he's actually very keen to meet other people, which,
Yeah.
I don't know. I think that when he sort of says, is that more people than I've got cats? I'm like, yes, it is, and therefore do not go. There's too many people. Stay with your
Too
cats.
many. Stay with your
Um,
cats. Yeah, he's
but
very willing to abandon those cats. He's, I think, on the way
yeah,
out, he's like, we've
yeah,
lived in all these different buildings together. I was like, oh, he's been around
yeah,
the world.
yeah.
But yeah, no.
One of the things I guess is why do they take the old man back with them?
Yeah, I mean, I guess they're using him as evidence that people can age, but I feel like it's already implied that, like, I think Logan says at some point, why would you want to be 31?
Yeah, exactly. So
Um,
like, I mean, they've obviously got the like hand thing already.
yeah.
But it does imply that people really don't believe that you could be old. And then,
Mm,
as you say, there's this strong thing that I think that we've discussed about not wanting to be old or look old or reveal those kinds of frailties. And although the old man is fairly robust in terms of managing the walk, doesn't manage the mad swim, which generally just I get absolutely terrified by things where people are like swimming into
so like
stuff
and
where,
holding their
yeah,
breath.
exactly,
Oh
where they
my
don't
God,
know where the outside is.
I
Just
would not make it.
stupid.
I would absolutely not make it. It would not be happening
Um,
for me. But yes, indeed.
Here's a proof, but proof of what? The existence of an
Yeah,
outside. I don't think he necessarily conclusively evidences that living for longer in the outside is better than living
living
for a shorter time in
a
the inside,
shorter
except
time.
for
Yeah,
taking us back to the conversation we had about the Matrix, like, do you choose the red pill kind of thing?
yeah, yeah.
Which also brings us back to the fact that this is another Plato's cave allegory, the
Yes.
earlier material, but it's just it's like the sun is such a big part of the kind of like cave thing, and there they are, they step out
Yeah,
and like,
and they
what's
see the
that?
sun.
And
They're
it's
like, "What is
warm.
it?" Yeah, it's
um
more
like feel that vitamin D. But it does carry the sort of same thing that like going back to reveal the truth will get you either kind of like ignored at
laughed at.
best
Yeah,
or killed at
ignored. Yeah,
worst.
killed it
Um,
worse. Yeah.
but fear not, because the truth will set you free, because the truth is so radical that it blows up the computer.
Yes, quite literally.
One of the weirdest scenes with
One of the
like
weirdest scenes.
avatars.
Yeah, indeed. They like the control center blows up and then the whole wide spanning city suddenly like sort of bursts into flames
Mm.
and the computer can't handle it, so everyone has to make an escape. Clearly a lot of people probably died. It
I
was
guess so,
yeah.
yeah. Yeah, well,
Um
it's going to help on the one in, one out process, isn't it, really?
yeah, it definitely is. I guess
Yeah, kind of
keep a
because of
couple
the
more
babies
people
and
around, yeah.
yeah.
Oh no,
Yeah.
the babies must have been left behind.
I would imagine so,
Oh
yeah.
no.
Yeah. And whoever's bringing up the children in the collective nursery, maybe nobody, maybe some
Yeah, maybe
droids or
they might have not
something. I
even
don't
gotten
know.
it out. Yeah.
On the plus side, it's very difficult to get out of this city and therefore kind of like blowing a hole in it is one of the few ways of kind of like dramatically revealing that there is an outside world wherein there
Yes.
is an old man. Very exciting. But there's also like, I guess, a metaphorical thing. Like, is this the only way that you can show people that a system can be better by
Hmm.
blowing up what you have and saying, look at it afresh? Or are they ultimately left with no functioning city,
Yeah. No functioning
no
city, nowhere
functioning
to
outside
be.
world,
No,
huge,
no
no skill
functioning
sets
skills.
for
Yeah,
these. Yeah,
literally.
yeah.
What are they gonna do? Big
Um,
allegory for the youth, the young generation, maybe. I
exactly.
don't
Yeah,
know.
exactly. You know, obviously we get the idea that, maybe the world could become habitable again. The old man lives in it, but I
Yeah,
don't know.
maybe.
Like 300 years for a sort of post kind of eco disaster rebuild. I think most of these things. What was it? How long was it when we were looking at the one where people got really tiny?
Oh, so downsizing,
Downsizing.
downsizing.
I think they were going into the ground for like
Like 1,000 years or
1,000 years or
something like that.
something. Yeah. So
Yeah, yeah.
mm,
So,
yeah,
interesting timeline of events, but
indeed. So takeaway message Marsha, from this film. I think
takeaway
we sound
message.
more confused now than we did at the beginning.
I genuinely think so too. The takeaway message, I feel like the message of the movie is an interesting one, very kind of rooted in 70s values, just like the kind of notion behind, implying that this society where young people are make up the majority, well, make up all of the population, and that their ideals, such as sort of this, I guess, like sexual freedom and like I
Much
don't know,
better
I
to be a
guess
beloved wife.
beloved wife, yeah, beloved wife. That was like an
Yeah.
interesting section. Beloved wife, beloved husband, and that rejecting the nuclear family
Mm.
and your devotion to work and all of that is bad. Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting, but I guess my main takeaway is
Mm.
that the 70s was a weird time, and that their interpretation of the future is fascinating, yet
Yeah.
probably quite wrong. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
what's your
It is.
interpretation, Claire?
Well, no, I'm not sure, but I mean, just to kind of like pull on what you're saying, it's interesting insofar as it's unusual in a way to have a dystopian film where the thing that is being overthrown, the structure and the control, is basically saying, no, we need to, the dystopia is this weird set of freedoms
Hmm.
that are controlled by one thing, but we need to go back to something that reduces freedoms, as you say, like
Yeah,
normal kind of work life, and relationships and things like that. But you'll be free of control
you'll
by
be
the
fr you'll find
computer.
freedom in individualism, I feel, is what it's trying to say, and the kind of
Yeah.
like,
Although in
and
a way, aren't they all quite like the
I
pursuits
don't
are all
know.
individual pleasure,
That
although
is
you
true.
are right, there is a social thing because everybody buys into the kind of like responsibility to make sure everyone dies at
Yeah.
30.
And I guess also like the communal live, like the not,
Mm,
well, I guess like the communal living and the the nature of like how these people are raised
mm,
in like a nursery. No one knows their parents. I guess that in some senses that is like part of the ideals of like a commune, which we
mm.
would consider in some ways utopian.
Yeah,
And then
yeah.
it kind of
Although
like
again,
flipped
as
it
you
back
say,
to
kind of
front.
like throwing out the sort of hippie ideals and that sort of
Yeah.
thing that might relate to. I guess that if I would take a kind of like positive from it, I've just been reading a newish book by Cory Doctorow, and I can't remember now what it is called, and of course it is upstairs. The Lost Cause, there we go. Okay, so it came out last year. And really, really fantastic novel. But basically, I believe it's been described as a hope punk novel. It's about like mitigating against climate change, and kind of the surviving of kind of like the MAGA ideal versus the idea of young people standing up and kind of like trying to envisage a new future where, in spite of the huge ecological troubles, you try and live within that essentially by building and by changing the structure of society. And quite a bit of it is this idea of kind of the grassroots social movement coming together and kind of doing things in the face of past legal frameworks, sort of institutions that no longer function for the society as it has now become. And as it's a complex novel in many ways, but I did come away with this idea of sort of saying, well, actually, to some degree, the system is not fit for purpose and continues to be not fit for purpose. And there's something in this film as well that's basically saying, wake up and look at our system and say that, there might be good things in our lives as they stand, but the system may not be fit for purpose and metaphorically should be blown up and kind of like evidence of new truths and things like that possibly something you could take out of this film, although my resounding takeaway remains the synthetic sort of soundtrack versus the big gushy orchestral soundtrack and the aesthetic, especially of the clothing, versus all the cats it's those contrasts that are really sort of like
Yes.
seared into my brain. And Ginny Agatha wearing a tiny green dress with nothing underneath it.
Yeah, a
That's
bit of
basically
cloth,
like a
really.
shawl. That's pretty much
Yeah,
going to stay with me
indeed.
forever, I think. Yeah, but I'm glad I've seen it.
Yeah, it was informative in some
Feels like a
senses.
precursor to a lot of
Yeah, to a
stuff,
lot of
doesn't it?
things. Yeah.
Lovely.
All right.
Well, thank you to our lovely listeners. If you have any comments or feedback on Logan's Run and your interpretation of it, what it actually means, we would very much like to hear them. You can contact us by email or via messenger on Instagram. We're at Dystopian Fiction Current Affairs, and you can find everything else in our link tree there. And you can also find us on Substack when we're not ill. She says, having missed another one this week because of my terrible cold. But yes, we put out newsletters on Substack, and you can follow us there as well. We'll be back in 2 weeks' time with Delicatessen, a film I have not
Delicatessen,
seen
yes.
for
Oh, right.
20 years, and you've not seen it at all.
I've never seen it point blank, so I'm looking forward to it. I know that was a proper cult classic, so
Yeah,
I'm looking forward to it.
I remember it being quite creepy. So that'll be one to look forward to. So we'll be
right.
with you in 2 weeks' time with that. And as I say, love to hear from our listeners. So do let us know what you think.
Yes. Thank you
Thank
very
you,
much.
Masha.
Thank you.